Hello everyone, bonjour, guten tag, hola to everyone who's watching. I know that this event hopefully will be streamed later on and accessible to people from across the world, and I know that we've had expressions of interest from people in finding out what we're going to be doing today. My name is Isabel Parasram and I am the Party Vice President of the Liberal Democrats. And I'm really thrilled to be here hosting this leadership hustings on behalf of the Association of Liberal Democrat Trade Unionists. And my co-chair is Sir Simon Hughes, who is the president of the ALDTU, and he is a former party president and former deputy leader. So I'm really in highly esteemed company, and Simon will be taking over the co-chairing of this event at roughly 11:45, halfway through. And for the first half of the event, what's going to happen is that I will be moderating the questions, asking questions, etc. And Simon will be keeping time and helping me with some of the things that are being said in the chat. So we do want this to be as interactive a session as possible. So welcome to everyone who has joined us today live, and a special shout out to Joe, who joined very early on. In fact, he was there when I was doing the technical checks this morning. So hello, Joe. So we're really thrilled to have with us both Ed and Layla, who are our fantastic candidates for leader. And I know that it's going to be a very hard choice for everybody because they're two such fantastic candidates. We also have Kevin from the ALDTU, who is possibly on your screens, and he is going to be dealing with some of the technical side of things. And I did just want to say a quick hello to our returning officer and HQ team who are running this event and doing a brilliant job of making sure that everything works very, very smoothly. So really happy that we're all here and able to participate in such a professional venture. Now, I just wanted to run through what's going to happen today, just so that everybody is aware of the way things are being run. And please accept our apologies in advance if we look down at pieces of paper, etc. There's so much going on. I'm looking at the chat, etc. So the way that this is going to work is that ideally we would love it if people were able to ask questions live. So if you do want to ask a question, could you indicate that you want to speak either audio or you would like to be seen? Please let us know and we'll attempt to make that happen. So that's our preference. But otherwise, I will read your question out and just identify you by your first name, unless you've given me permission to share your last name. And please be aware that this session is being recorded, so take whatever steps you need to safeguard your identity if you need to do that. So we're going to begin with an opening speech, and the opening speech will first be by Ed, then Layla. That was decided through toss of a coin, and that opening speech will be 3 minutes long. Then we will have questions that I will put to both candidates, and the time frame for answering those is 2 minutes. If either candidate wishes to respond to the other, they will have 30 seconds to do that. If we ask a follow-up question, which might not necessarily be to both candidates, although I will try to make sure follow-ups are evenly addressed, that will be a time limit of 2 minutes. So I hope that that's clear. And Simon and I have agreed that we won't intervene to give you a 30-second warning or anything like that. We'll just say time is up because we want you to have as much time as possible to continue with the flow of your answers. And I will paraphrase questions if I'm reading them out, just to make it clearer sometimes, or if I need to shape it slightly differently, I'll do that. But just before we begin, I'd like to thank our candidates for being here with us on a Saturday morning. Just curious as to what you might otherwise have been doing if you want to be with us. So Ed, would you like to answer that? Can't hear you, Ed, you'll have to unmute.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
We can.
Sorry, but technical problems there. I was going to say that if I hadn't been with you, I'd be taking my son and daughter on a walk. John has a little special tricycle, which enables him to come and join us because he's disabled and can't walk. One of the things we often do on a Saturday morning, we either go swimming, but we can't at the moment, or we go for a walk and a tricycle ride.
That sounds so fantastic, and it would have been lovely because it's a beautiful day, certainly here for me in London. And Layla, what would you have been doing?
So Saturday mornings, I quite like to get out and about. So it's normally where I would do my weekly shop, and I'd be probably in a queue waiting to get into Co-op.
Yes, and queuing with a mask, I suspect, 2 meters.
Exactly, absolutely. And I've been starting to wear the mask more. It is its own art to get it to not steam up your glasses. For those of us who are bespectacled, I'm learning all the tricks of the trade to try and keep it from misting up. It's quite a challenge.
I've even seen a Facebook chat on how to sort out mask with glasses on. So
that's right.
Yes, absolutely. It's clearly an issue. So now that we've dealt with the preliminaries, I'd love to go ahead and go with your opening speeches. So Ed, if you'd like to go ahead, and your 3 minutes starts now.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for joining us on your Saturday mornings. Friends, these are challenging times for our country and our party. We're seeing job losses, COVID continuing, the climate emergency, Brexit. I think as leader, I've both the vision and experience to help us meet those challenges. Take the economy and the climate. For too long, I think they've been separated, and I take a radically different approach. Every policy from economy to foreign affairs must focus on climate change. Take my green recovery plan, investing £150 billion. Green homes, green transport, green energy, a rewilding of natural habitats with a green jobs guarantee. This is the way we could have a real green vision for our country. And I can deliver a green vision because I've experienced doing it before. I fought the Tories on climate and won, nearly quadrupling Britain's renewable power. I brought green jobs to communities in decline, like 1,000 manufacturing jobs in Hull, making turbine blades for wind farms. And my eco-passion came from reading Seeing Green by Jonathan Porritt, age 18. It's where I also discovered how a universal basic income can help the most vulnerable in our society. And when I worked as Paddy Ashdown's economics advisor, I developed our party's first ever UBI. So I bring to a UBI vision, real experience, and my training as an economist. And beyond a greener, fairer society, post-COVID, we should be the party of caring, the party of carers. Our country's 10 million carers, 3 times as many people who voted for us at the last election. I've experienced caring, first as a young carer. Dad died when I was 4, and Mum became terminally ill when I was a teenager, and so I nursed her with my brothers. Now Emily and I care for our wonderful children, including my severely disabled son John, who needs 24/7 care. So I do understand what millions of carers go through every day. And I think my life experience therefore helps me relate to people, to voters, and to their challenges. In the general election review, you can see our party's challenges. The review certainly does not say the way forward is as simple as moving on from the coalition. We tried moving on in 2017 with a leader who actually voted against the coalition's most controversial measures, and it didn't help. You see, our party's challenges are bigger. The review's 61 pages and many recommendations make clear there are no quick fixes. And it says our most serious problem is not telling people why vote Liberal Democrat. And my vision to you in this contest begins to do that.
You have to stop.
I talked about a greener, fairer, more caring society, and that's what I deliver.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. Layla, would you like to give your opening speech?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you all as well. It's a pleasure to be here. And ALTU has a critical role to play in the Lib Dems, ensuring that we uphold the interest of working people and trade union members are clearly heard. And under my leadership, I want your voice to be louder and clearer. But let's be in no doubt. I mean, our party has to change. And we did achieve great things in coalition, but we also made big mistakes and we've suffered from it. We've now underperformed in 3 general elections in a row. We've lost half our council base during the last 10 years. And other than being against Brexit, most voters haven't got a clue what we actually stand for. We're dwindling in the polls. We have to do better. And we need a broader agenda with a wider appeal to win again. But that's particularly true in the world of work. Patterns of working are changing, even before the pandemic. And now it's been supercharged. More people are working from home, which suits some and not others. Many have struggled with work and looking after children, with isolation and loneliness, with inadequate equipment and broadband. And work will continue to keep changing at an ever-increasing pace. For our children's futures, we have to tackle the climate and nature emergencies, but that means many jobs are likely to go. And new jobs will arise in renewables, in energy efficiency, in nature restoration, but in different places, requiring different skills. And just like great liberals like Keynes and Beveridge, rebuilding Britain's social contract has to be top of our agenda now. We must build a country in which every individual can fulfill their potential, regardless of where they're from, their family's wealth, their gender, colour, or sexuality. And that means attacking inequality, raising wages for all, those who have been called key workers, health and social care workers, delivery drivers, workers in food supply. It means creating a decent safety net and investing in education and retraining to make it easier for people to change jobs. I've made education, the environment, and the economy as key pillars of my campaign because these are bread and butter issues that really matter to people. We need a leader who can rebuild trust in the Liberal Democrats, who can speak to people's hearts and not just their heads, and who can convince voters that we tell the truth, understand their concerns, and will fight their corner. There has never been a more important time for a revived Liberal Democrats, and we must seize this moment. I want to change our party for the better so that we can change our country for the better. And I want us to move forward together. I hope you'll join me.
Thank you for that, Ed and Layla. Thank you, Layla. That's given us a lot of food for thought, and I can already see that people are responding in the chat, so that's fantastic. Mary, if you would like to be ready to ask your question live, that would be fantastic. And I can see that there are other questions starting. So Kevin, if you could let Mary appear on audio and visual, and Phil, if you could stand by as well, we'll be coming to you.
It doesn't look as though I've got the controls. Someone else must have the controls to do that.
Right, okay. Well, in the meantime, while you're sorting out the AV, Kevin, if you could leave Mary and Phil ready to speak, I'll raise a question that somebody called Nuki Proctor, who is the Vice Chair of the West Midlands region, she has submitted a question, and her question is this: what role do you see the party leaders playing in shaping policies surrounding the workplace, employment and employee protection? That question will go to Ed, and I will just, let me just repeat it for you. What role do you see the party leaders playing in shaping policies surrounding the workplace, employment and employee protection?
Well, the party leader's job is to give some vision and some leadership, but of course we're a democratic party and the policy is made by the members, which is fantastic. It's one of the reasons why I kicked off a new experiment in the party called Policy Lab, which is an online policy platform so more members can get involved and we can be more democratic and more people can feed into policies, yes, on employment and working practice, but on more things more widely. As it so happens, I'm particularly interested in this area, particularly interested in the social justice element. So we tackle the gig economy and the insecurity of work, but also around carers. I put forward a proposal to change employment law so that carers who are juggling work responsibilities and caring responsibilities get extra protection. I'm the patron of the Disability Law Service, and we've shown that over 50% of carers who ask their employer for more flexible working get that denied. My proposal, coming from legal experts, which I've tabled in Parliament, would give extra employment protections. And that's the sort of lead I'd like to give to the party, so we can be seen as a party that really cares about working people in the workplace.
Layla, what's your response to that question?
Well, as a general point around policy, I mean, our party is best when it's fizzing with ideas. And that's the kind of party that I want as leader to help to create. It's why I pulled together that Build Back Better book, allowing voices from across the party to put those ideas forward. But of course, if it's the party that creates the prose, the role of the leader is to do the poetry. And my job is to make sure that what we are saying is said in a way that is distinctly liberal, is bold, and really resonates with people out on doors. And that door knocking, that really connecting with voters is a critical thing for the leader to do, because what it helps you to develop is that sense of, it's almost a feeling of where people are and how we can best put forward our best ideas. On the issues of work, for example, in my own work as education spokesperson, that's why I developed the universal free childcare proposal that was in our manifesto at the last election, was really bold, was better than any other party was putting forwards. And the reason why I did that was because actually I was hearing from my own constituents about how difficult it was, particularly for the main caregivers, which is usually disproportionately women, who were saying that it was just too expensive and they couldn't find a way of making that work-life balance work. In this coronavirus crisis, I've been calling for flexible working to be enshrined in law, and that if you ask to be able to work flexibly, of course, if you work in an industry where that allows, it's not going to really work for the construction industry, for example. But I was being contacted, for example, by call center staff who were being forced to go into work, who were concerned that their workplaces were not COVID secure and had no recourse when their employer said, no, we want you in. And it should be something looked at in law. And I've been calling for it. And I'm delighted that a couple of weeks ago, actually, Matt Hancock said that he agreed with having such legislation. So we need to raise the concerns of real people, but also allow big space for the party to help to come up with these policies.
Thank you, Layla. I know that some of the issues that you've both raised are the subject of questions that are likely to come up. So let's drill down a little bit further, and this will go to Layla first, please. And Mary, I'd love it if you could ask your question, please.
So because of all of the equalities issues in our extraordinary times, you know, with Black Lives Matter and COVID sort of putting the accent on home working, actually I've begun to think that what we need, and I'm a person with disabilities, I'm a trade unionist, and what I've begun to believe is that actually we need reasonable adjustments for everyone. That is the only way that we are going to emancipate men, white men, from feeling pressured into a long hours culture, and therefore them feeling like they can't give space and a sense of belonging to everybody else. Because the last thing I, as a disabled person, want is to be seen as different. I don't want to be different. I just want the same access and the same opportunity. So if we give everybody the flexibility of home working and that support to have a good work-life balance, would we therefore be quicker at achieving true equity and equality?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mary. And I think actually, yes, I mean, I actually got some constituency cases of people who contacted me saying they had been told by their employers that because they couldn't have reasonable adjustments, that they were worried that they'd go into work during COVID-19 and not be able to get the public transport to get there. And they felt that there was a massive, massive barrier. And actually, this digitization of the workplace, they have felt has been really positive for them. And so it's not all doom and gloom. I think we need to be wary not to fall into the trap saying that COVID-19, and yes, it's going to be difficult, but unless as a party we are going to give people that sort of sliver of silver in the clouds of what kind of country could we be afterwards, and see the opportunities that this is creating for us as a country, then I think we're missing a trick. And there's a space for a party that is hopeful, that is forward-looking, that is looking at how we can make the world a better place. And that's why I've been pushing for this flexible working law, so that actually the default becomes that you can ask for this flexible working and get it, rather than at the moment everyone can ask for it, which by the way was something we did in coalition. I was very proud of it at the time, but far too many employers then say, well, no, and then the reasons they're saying no are left unchallenged, and actually that's a place for where the trade unions quite often can step in. So I see an enormous opportunity here to level that playing field. But I think, just as an aside, we have to also recognise that it's a little bit the preserve of the middle class to be able to do this at all. I mean, how many people are out there trying to work from home and don't have a spare bedroom, don't have a spare space, don't have decent broadband, don't have access to a laptop? And so I would just caution our party to, when we are doing things like this, just to widen our net in terms of who we are taking evidence from and who we're listening to. Because we also need to find solutions for them. And actually, I think that also comes back to decent houses. You know, having homes that are geared up for flexible working, that have that good space, and that have that ability to give people that true level playing field. Those are the kinds of policies I'd love to see us pursue as a party.
Thanks, Layla. Ed, would you like to address the same question, please?
Mary, your questions made my heart sing. For me, and I guess for many other dads, being able to work from home has been fantastic. So you've had more time with your kids, and even doing these hustings, I used to go around the country and I can do from home and I can see my kids as well. So it's very family friendly. And I think that's something we need to keep. And I think we need to keep it for everybody, that flexibility. Indeed, I was a minister in the government who pushed flexible working for everybody. The Tories wouldn't allow us to create it as a right, it was still a request. And that's why I've tabled the legislation, this time for reasonable adjustments for carers, so that it becomes a right. And I'd start with carers, but then I think we could look at other areas as well. And I think that flexible working approach is really important. Be clear, we'll have a tough fight. I'm up for that fight. When I was doing the work for shared parental leave and I created the policy and Joe put it into law, I was consulting with businesses. And, I remember this one event where I was talking about how I wanted either the father or the mother to have the right to the time off, and they could share it really flexible so it suited them and their families. And I presented this to this group of businessmen, and they were all men. At the end of it, there was a deathly silence. And one said, "You mean I won't be able to employ blokes now? You mean I won't be able to employ blokes now?" What did that show? That showed appalling discrimination against women in the labour force. And I took a lot of lessons from that. If you want equality for everybody, on gender, on disability, for carers, you've really got to tackle that prejudice that's out there. And one thing that COVID does, and one thing that home working does, that Zoom does, I think it moves away from some of that prejudice that people had about home working. So I think we need to build on that. It's a real opportunity. And I'd like to take on, whether it's my reasonable adjustment for carers bill, the flexible working stuff that I did in government, the shared parental leave, and take that employment protection into the next age. And I think that could be really exciting for the party.
Thank you for that, both Layla and Ed. That's fantastic. We'll now move on to Phil, and I just want to warn Kathy that she will be coming after Phil, so be prepared to log on for your audio and visual. Phil, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you, Isabel. I just want to preface this by saying this is my first ever event as a member of the Liberal Democrats. And I've been a trade union activist in Usdaw for the last 5 years or so. During that time, if you say the words Liberal Democrats to anybody who's been more engaged in the political side of union activism than the average, the name of our party attracts scorn, contempt, mistrust. We are going to need to build a relationship with the trade union movement if we want to advance our country in a more progressive direction. As leader, how would you go about doing this and supporting trade union activists to spread liberal values in the trade union movement?
Ed, would you like to address that first, please?
Well, first of all, Phil, welcome to your first event, and I hope you're really enjoying it, and hopefully you'll come to many more. I thought Usdaw has been an amazing trade union fighting for shop workers and others over the years, so thank you for the work you've done in that too. as leader to reach out to the trade union movement, I think we've got to make it clear that our party is for social justice, that our party wants to tackle inequality and poverty, that our party wants to represent people who are in the workplace and who need support against employers who are not treating them reasonably. And I like to think, I've given you some examples. Let me give you two more. When I was a minister, I got rid of a law called the default retirement age, which enabled employers to sack people just because they got to 65. It was totally discriminatory, outrageous and ageist. And we got rid of it. And the trade unions at the time were really pleased. The employers weren't, but the trade unionists were. So there's an example that I can point to of reaching out and working with trade unions. And when I was a Secretary of State, in my own department, I was fed up that there were workers there, contract workers who were doing things like cleaning and catering and security, who weren't even on the living wage. And I couldn't bear working in a department where we got well-paid civil servants, well-paid ministers, and we were being looked after by people who were, because it had been contracted out, weren't being paid properly. So I said to my permanent secretary, we've got to solve this. I want the London living wage for everybody who works in my department. The Tories didn't want to do it. We had contracts with the DEFRA, headed up by a Tory who wasn't interested. And my permanent secretary said, well, we can't do it because we've got the same contract. And I said, we are going to do it. We are going to do it. It took me a year and I got it. And I was the first cabinet minister forced through. Labour didn't do it. Tories didn't do it. A Liberal Democrat did. A London living wage in the department for what was then called the Department for Energy and Climate Change. And I was very proud of doing that. And I think it shows that as leader, I've got a track record of helping individuals in my department, changing the law in favour of workers, and a real vision about social justice and working for people who are hard working in the workplace where employers may be trying to not treat them properly. So
Thank you very much, Ed.
I will do that,
Thank
Phil.
you.
Sorry, Simon was trying to wave at you, but Simon, you weren't unmuted. So.
I apologize. I muted myself in order to help reception. Layla will be entitled to another 25 seconds.
Okay. Well, thank you. Welcome, Phil. It's wonderful that you're here, and I'm delighted that you've put your question across, because actually I think this is really important and something that I've noticed in my role as education spokesperson. One of the first things that I started to do was I went to the teaching unions conferences, and when I was there, I mean, I have to tell you, it was quite a mixed reception. At the head teachers ones, it was easier, but actually when I went to the NEU one, for example, I was walking around that hall and there were people actively heckling me as I was walking through, and it was a direct result of policies that they felt they didn't agree with, that we had put through in coalition. And it was that coalition baggage that was hanging around my neck, but I was not afraid of dealing with it. And that's why I went, because I think, first of all, you have to engage positively with the unions. And the reason why is because they're so in touch with people on that shop floor. You know, if we're going to be serious about being a party that's relevant again on those bread and butter issues that I spoke about in my opening statement, about being there for working class people, not just, you know, people who are well educated from London and the Southeast, were seen as very metropolitan elite. If we're going to change the face of our party, we need to actually engage in those big issues that are facing people right now. So it's about the gig economy, people feeling that they can have 2 or 3 jobs and still feel that they can't make ends meet. You know, these are the kinds of things that matter to them. And so in the speeches that I was giving in those conferences, I recognized that we needed to build back trust. And I have. And in the work that I've been doing around education, I've pulled together a commission, a cross-party commission that includes the unions in policy making, that also includes business, that also includes industry, that also includes academics. And where we've seen Liberal Democrats really delivering now, like Kirsty Williams in Wales, it's where she has engaged with the unions as part of the decision-making process. So I would love us to see as a party, first of all, actively reaching out to unions more, asking them to feed in to our policy papers, to the ideas that we want to put forward as a party, we shouldn't be precious about any ideas that only come from Lib Dem members. It needs to be much broader than that. That's going to help us create policies that really connect with people. So as leader, whilst I obviously don't make all the policy, and I can't make all the policy, and I shouldn't make all the policy, I can encourage FPC, for example, to be doing it that way, and have that wide consultation, which should include the unions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Layla. Thank you, Ed. So the next question, I just want to put Luke on notice that he's going to be asking his question, and then what I'm going to do is quickly squeeze in a question that came in earlier, and this is from Catherine Loads, and this will be directed to Layla first, please. So what she has asked, we're changing tack slightly, what she has asked is, what can we do to level the playing field between physical high street businesses and online businesses? And she's saying that this will in turn benefit those workers who are customer facing. So what can we do to level the playing field? Can you go ahead, Layla, please?
Thank you. Well, I think one of the big issues here is that the world of retail is changing, and far more people are obviously buying things online. But because big companies like Amazon, frankly, do not pay their fair share of tax. And I remember sitting on the Public Accounts Committee. I did that for the last 3 years. And that's the committee that quizzes the civil service. And we would quite often have a HMRC in front of us. And we would talk to them about the tax take of these big online companies. And they said, you know, they would have a dedicated portal, a dedicated liaison in with the government where they would negotiate the amount of tax that they were paying. And that's just so unfair. If you're a small independent trader that has to deal with business rates, which by the way need massive reform, and I know our party's got some brilliant policy on that, which I completely agree with, then we need to level that playing field by, first of all, making sure that they pay their fair share, because they are using that very same infrastructure as all the other businesses and are managing to cream off those profits and take those profits elsewhere. So I would like to see an extension to the digital services tax, so that we can start to then plough that into subsidies for particularly small independent traders. And that in turn is going to help the high street, which by the way is not just a place that people should go to buy something. As we've seen with COVID, that sense of place has never been more important. You know, we're getting to know our neighbours better than we have before. Let's make it somewhere that people want to meet, to see other people, to build those communities. To be a liberal is to give individuals that sense of own agency, but also to help build those strong communities around them so that they feel supported. So I think some really hard-hitting policies that speak to the bottom line could then be ploughed into local government to help build those communities, and that in turn will help build those small and medium-sized enterprises that are very place-based, that are the backbone of our economy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Layla. I suspect you finished right on time because Simon said thank you for the first time. Simon. Ed.
Deal, as the French say.
Ed, would you like to?
I'll try to go on time. Catherine, thanks for the question. You know, this is so important. We're seeing our town centres, our village centres, but they're being destroyed. And that is taking the heart out of many communities. And you add the problems with the pub closures, and you've got a real problem. And just at a time when people are working at home and don't want to travel so much on public transport or whatever, they want more community hubs. And so we've really got to tackle this one. My proposals, three tax measures and a big boost for local government. Tax measure 1, get rid of business rates. Introduce the land value tax proposal, which I've worked on with the Liberal Democrat Business and Entrepreneurs Network. Really good ideas for retail sector, and indeed really redistributive across the country. Very good for the regions. Second measure, the digital services tax the government's bringing in, that needs to be expanded. You know, we've got to get tough with what they're called the FANGs, the Facebook, the Apple, Netflix and Google and Amazon. We can't allow these big tech giants to get away, and digital service taxes is part of that solution. My third tax measure is to go after the other loopholes that they use not to pay their fair share of taxes. So 3 tax solutions to level the playing field, if you like, so the small independents can stay in our town centres. But the final measure is probably as important, giving powers and resources to local government so they can really rebuild those community centres, so there can be arts and culture, learning, new housing in the centre of towns, so we can really get that hubbub going again. And I think that would be the best tonic to COVID.
Thank you very much, both Layla and Ed. I just wanted to read out a comment in the chat because we're probably so concentrating on answering the questions that you can't see the comments. But it's just to say that people are saying thank you very much for the responses that you've given. And they're really informative and great responses is the way that it's been described. So well done. And certainly I'm learning a lot about what you both believe in terms of policy in what could be viewed as quite a niche area. So this is all going really well. So Luke is going to ask us a question by audio. He's camera shy this morning. So Luke, would you like to go ahead and address your question first of all to Ed, please?
Yeah, no, can you hear me okay?
Can.
Yes, okay. Good morning to both candidates. Thanks for taking the time to discuss an area of policy which is not always the most comfortable for Liberal Democrats. Couple of years ago, I lost a job I had under contentious circumstances. One of the things the coalition had done, which has since been struck down, was bring in tribunal fees. But what I actually discovered when I went to challenge what had happened at my job through a solicitor was that if you don't earn enough money in this country, it's basically not worth your time. I was earning pretty close to minimum wage. It wasn't quite minimum wage, but discussing it with my solicitor, I had a good case. You know, you can never predict how things are going to go in a tribunal, but the solicitor feels very confident. But when it came down to working out what kind of reward I would have got, it just simply wasn't worth it for the solicitor to take it forward because I wouldn't have been able to cover her fees, basically, with the reward I would have gotten out of it. So we basically have a situation in this country where, and this was a company that makes billions every year, is essentially allowed to fire minimum wage employees outside what the letter of the law is, and not really reasonably expect to suffer any consequences for that because we can't afford to hold them to account because the rewards that you would get from the employment tribunal aren't enough. So basically my question is, you know, do you guys, I know party makes policy, but we all know leaders have huge amounts of influence on the direction of the party, and is that should be a situation that we you know, should aim to correct? And would you be aiming to put in a situation where that doesn't happen? It is one of the most egregious examples of, in my view, of, you know, the big man being able to stomp on the little man, as it were.
Thank you for that question, Luke. Would you like to go ahead and answer?
Oh yes, sorry. I was waiting for you to invite me. Luke, listen, I'm incredibly sorry you had that job loss, and it sounds like it was a very difficult period for you. And I'm sure all our hearts go out to you. And I hope you know you've managed to get things back on track. But you're absolutely right. The employment tribunal fees was a real wrong measure. It was Chris Grayling, as Secretary of State for Justice, who oversees the tribunals, of course, who pushed that through. Vince Cable was really pushing back and trying his best to stop it, but the Tories were determined to do it. And what we were doing to try to offset it was a number of other measures. You know, I've mentioned some of the extra employment protections that I brought in. Joe brought in, you know, naming and shaming employers who didn't pay minimum wages. I think that was a good policy. The thing that I was really focused on, which half answers your question, is trying to help mediation and reconciliation before you get to a tribunal system. Because you're right, the benefits, the money that people get from employment tribunals has always not been very good, not just the coalition years, but going way back. People have found they've fought their case, they've won, and they've not really benefited from all that effort and pain. And so having listened to employees and workers and unions, I got the impression that what we really wanted, yes, let's do the sorts of things to tighten up the employment tribunal, so there are higher payouts if you win. but also let's try and help people sort out the problems in the first place through mediation and reconciliation. I was really impressed by ACAS. I think ACAS are one of the unsung heroes in the industrial space, and so many unions have told me that they want ACAS to be given more resources so they can do that role and help them as they help employees, including those who aren't in unions. So I would want to see ACAS pushed. I'd like to see much more resources into those mediation and reconciliation processes, which hopefully can keep people in the jobs and get over these tensions that sometimes arise. There has to be the backstop with employment tribunals, yes, try and prevent things in the first place.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Layla, would you like to address the same question, please?
Yeah, thanks. Well, Luke, yeah, unfortunately all too common a story, and one that I hear quite often in my own constituency surgery, and it just feels so wrong, and it is wrong. And I think the failing Grayling's plan in coalition was clearly a mistake. And what should have happened after that was a review of why we saw a massive plummet in the number of people taking their employers to tribunal, because it is the big man. And even if it is a massive company, actually this also happens in small and medium-sized companies too, is that you need to have a way for everyone to feel that their case has been put across and that they have the support to be able to do that. And my own view is that legal aid budgets have been cut now to the bone. We need to make sure that those who can't afford to pay legal fees are able to access that help in the first place. And it shouldn't be in this country that how much money you have determines your ability to access high quality legal advice. But that is the case. If you've got the money, the more expensive the lawyer is, the better they may be, or the more connected they may be. And so those who are at the bottom of the ladder, who aren't making that much money, who are now considered essential workers very often, it's the very same people who we were clapping for on Thursday evenings in COVID-19, who are the ones who potentially are the worst affected. And it bluntly is wrong. So actually, one of the things that I have been encouraging people to do is to consider joining their trade unions. I'm very concerned about the future prospects for workers right now, especially those who have been on furlough or out of the system or coming back. You've got large numbers of companies who, because of the financial situation and because of their concern over the future, are going to go through restructures, and they may end up unlawfully removing people from jobs in ways that aren't fair. And of course, it's going to be the small guy that's affected. So my own view is that we need to look carefully at the legal aid budget, and we need to increase access to legal aid so that anyone who needs to raise a case can.
Thank you very much, both of you. And just before I hand over to Simon for his half of the hustings, I just wanted to ask one question that's really arisen from the thing both said, and Layla, this will go to you first. Presumably you've had experience, both of you, of being an employee, possibly even of running a business or being involved in the corporate management of a business. So I'm interested in finding out what you have learned from those experiences that will inform what you do as party leader going forward if you were to be elected. So Layla, I hope I've made my question clear, but would you like to?
Thank you. Well, no, Isabel, in fact, I was on the other end of this. So when I was a teacher in London, there was a man who some might remember. His name was Chris Woodhead. He was one of the people, he was the original Ofsted inspector, and he actually over the time went from sort of left to right in politics and tried to bring in merit-related pay into my school. And for teachers, we felt that this wasn't fair. Teaching is a team effort. It shouldn't be that those who are getting better exam results get more money. Actually, we are all in it together. And actually what we were pushing for was training. We were pushing for a seat at the table on the board so that we could put our pastoral concerns across, and we were being absolutely frozen out. I found myself for about a year in a situation where, despite the fact that my exam results were good, I was a physics teacher, I had no issue knowing that I would get another job afterwards. And I ended up unionizing and actually making a group of the 200 teachers in that school so that we could put our collective concerns forward to the board. And we did manage to actually change our own pay and conditions to an extent, although they then went along with that policy. And I was the very first person to sort of the I am Spartacus moment and said, right, I stood up at a staff meeting and said, I can't stay here, I'm leaving. And after that, sadly, a lot of people followed. But we felt we had no choice. So I know exactly what it feels like from the other point of view. And the way that actually it all went wrong, what I've learned since, and I'm a manager of 3 different teams now, but for a while I sat on the senior leadership team at a social enterprise, managing the publishing arm of that business. I had my own employees, and actually the ethos of my office, the ethos of me as a leader, the way that you interact with the staff around you and make them feel empowered, make them feel valued, that really matters. And I think this is a problem in our own party. I do think that we as a party need to work on our own ethos of valuing our volunteers, valuing our party staff. We are not very good at dealing with mental health issues, and that is something that as leader I want to address. And you start by bringing everyone on board to a common endeavour and recognising that we need to support each other to support our communities.
Thank you, Layla. Ed, would you like to answer the same question, please?
Well, I've learned a very simple lesson as an employee and as an employer. And that's if you treat people well, if you treat them with respect, if you pay them properly, it's fantastic rewards to the organisation. People work harder, they're more committed, and their colleagues actually like the fact that everyone's being treated properly. 2 examples. First, when I was an employee, I was working as a management consultant, traveling around the world and focusing on improving businesses. And the boss was a real Tory. And his secretary, who was really nice, really popular in the relatively small consultancy, about 40 people, she was pregnant. She got pregnant. And in those days, you got no maternity rights until you'd been in the company for 2 years. And he actually sacked her. He sacked her. It was appalling. We all complained, but he pushed it through. The impact on the rest of the consultants, it was we didn't work as hard. We were so fed up and so angry. It was just the wrong thing to do in principle, but it actually backfired on him, and good job too. As an employer, where I mentioned when I was Secretary of State, I brought in a London living wage. When the day I left office for the election in 2015, the head of the contract workers asked me to go and meet them. And they thanked me, and the manager said, do you know it's made such a difference? Because the turnover of staff has changed. It used to be people coming and going all the time because they couldn't afford to stay. Now you're paying us a proper living wage. They stay, and that's reduced our costs of hiring and training, and we've got a much happier team. So that's what I take from 2 experiences, and I want to make sure that party employees, our wonderful staff, get treated with proper respect, and I think that will be great for the party as well as the right thing to do.
Thank you both for sharing that. And I think it's always good to have a question where we can get a personal insight into your life experiences outside of politics. So we really appreciate that. And I can see in the chat that people are saying that it's been really informative from both of you. So thank you so much. I'm now going to pass on to Simon. Kathy, if you could be ready to ask your question, I will give Simon the microphone, as it were.
Isabel, thank you very much indeed. I think we ought to do a radio programme as co-hosts. I think I'm dedicated to this.
I'd listen in.
And I'm very glad to be handing over the timekeeping. Normally this time on a Saturday morning, I would be doing my 5K run, and the timekeeping was very important. Anyway, I'm enjoying this. Mrs. Thatcher, in her last speech on the day she announced she's stepping down, came to the Commons and was in absolutely top form, and in the middle of the debate said, I really enjoy this. Well, I'm really enjoying it. It's a really good debate. And I want to, as we introduce part 2, thank Ed and Layla for really good engagement, and suggest to Kevin that we might follow this up with all those who have participated, Kevin, with a Zoom discussion, because there's such, as Layla said, a fizzing with ideas here, and I want to pick this up. So well done, everybody. And the Trade Union Congress actually respect us and value us very much. So we shouldn't ever underestimate our influence. When I was in Parliament, working with colleagues, Francis O'Grady was really keen to engage with us. And Danny Alexander and I worked with the Trade Union Congress, so let's not underestimate. So we're going to kick off, and we're going to kick off, please, with Kathy. And then after that, if we can have Tom Purvis. And Tom, if you're willing to ask your question online as well, that would be really good. So over to Kathy next.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to speak. I'm actually chair of Outsourcing, so welcome to everybody. It's great that we have so many participants. Thank you very much, Layla and Ed, for your answers to your questions, and to Simon and everybody who organised this, because I wasn't involved at all in the organising. I'm glad we had some good questions and answers about the role of trade unions and the Liberal Democrat Party and how we can work together. Yeah, so it's been great so far, and I'm going to ask a different question, and that is, what would you as leader do about trade deals, which it looks like we're going to have some very bad trade deals with Brexit, particularly, for instance, with the USA, and bringing in American food where they have poorer food safety and animal welfare standards. So what would you do about that?
Thank you very much, Kathy. And I think it's Ed first, please. Ed.
Welcome to the presentation, Simon. I'm on my 7th week of Couch to 5K, so I'm catching you up. Kathy, really important question. Trade deals over the next few years are going to be absolutely part of the big debate on the economy. And I really worry that the Tories are going to sell us out on food standards, on animal welfare, on consumer standards. And you know what? Business is really worried too. I set up a business task force when COVID happened so I could get really good ideas from different business groups. I was on a call yesterday with the CBI, with Mate UK, with Federation of Small Business, with British Chambers of Commerce, and they're talking about their worries about the future trade deals. And I think that's really interesting, and that might be where we can make some progress opposing them. Clearly, we'll have to do that in Parliament and campaign in Parliament and get much greater transparency and ability to amend them. But we need to work with business, because the Tories are saying this is great for business. Well, it won't be. There'll be a lot of businesses who will lose out with some of the trade deals and some of the ideas that are being talked about. And I think that will enable us to be seen as a party of business, but also to get a coalition, if you like, with business and with civil society, with the trade unions as well, with the trade unions to oppose this. And I think, wouldn't it be good if Liberal Democrats could be part of that group opposing this Tory right-wing, devil take the hindmost trade policies, working with business and the unions, so we come together and we could be the centre of a really big union business campaign against the Tories.
Thank you very much, Ed. Layla.
Thanks, Kathy. Yeah, so, I mean, interestingly about this, I think there is an opportunity here for us to start to regain credibility with some of those Tory voters who left us, particularly over Brexit. And in many of our heartlands, you know, I'm thinking our farming heartlands, this really affects them. And the NUJ, who I've been behind the scenes doing some work with, better understanding their concerns, say this is a top issue for them. But in my Tory-facing areas, which is most of Oxford, West and Abingdon, to be fair, this really gets up people's goose. They really, really care about this. And a lot of them wouldn't normally be Lib Dem voters. So I've been working with some quite strange bedfellows over the last few months, because we have to reach those voters to make the case, to then in turn ask them to make the case to their Tory MP so that we can get stuff through the House. Because unless we can change stuff now in the Houses of Parliament, we aren't going to actually affect real change. So I did a story, which was a nearly whole page story with the Daily Mail about food standards, not someone who I'd normally be doing stories with in general. But the reason why we chose to do it with them, and it was to challenge Liz Truss to have a meal of chlorinated chicken and hormone injected beef, was to make the point to Daily Mail readers that this is not what they voted for. This was not the high level of standards that they want. And by doing things like that, by getting that cut through in the media that I've got a proven track record of being able to do, you then start to influence the debate, and you can show people how what they had hoped for with Get Brexit Done is not what's about to be delivered. And then you make the case in the House for why we should be sticking as close as we possibly can to the customs union and the single market. But the other thing that's going to be going wrong is that these trade deals actually don't need to be ratified by the House of Commons. So we need to legislate to do that. And if we're going to get such legislation through and get support for that in the House, then we are going to have to build cross-party support. And that's what I'm really, really good at. I've got the connections in the Houses of Parliament now to build cross-party support behind campaigns. It's how I delivered the coronavirus compensation scheme, for example. And that was done with backbench Tory MPs, as well as Labour and the Greens. So it's about building coalitions of people, MPs and voters around an idea. And then hopefully come the next election, when they think, well, who stood up for me? Who really stood up for what I really care about? They will associate that with us. And that's how we're going to build back credibility.
Okay, Ed, you've probably got another 20 seconds on your time because Layla overran a little.
Sorry.
No, I mean, I just actually pick up something Layla said. I think in the rural areas in particular, there's real disquiet about some of these trade deals. And I think it will be one of the areas that we can build back in some of those areas. And people like Tim Farron are campaigning hard and leading campaigns in those rural areas, which could win us some of our rural seats back again.
Great, thank you very much, both. I think we're now going to Fiona. No, I beg your pardon, to Tom. Tom, are you happy to go with your question?
Yep, that's right. Thanks, Simon. So my question is, we know that employers have been cutting training opportunities over the last sort of decade, 2 decades for employees. So I'm just wondering how Layla and Ed think we can actually sort of try to reverse that. Should it be mandatory to provide so many hours of CPD per year, or do you think there's another way we can boost how much training employers give employees? Thank you both.
Tom, thank you very much. I think it's Ed to kick off. Layla's kick off.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Well, actually, there is a brilliant piece of party policy which Simon, among others, was involved in creating, and that is our policy of lifelong learning accounts. And this was designed and it was done with this kind of thing in mind, to encourage people to engage in extra training, to engage in expanding their own horizons. And they could use it, for example, to in the middle of their career to get that one qualification that is actually quite expensive, to get them onto that next level, that managerial level, for example. It's something that we at the last election pushed quite hard, and I would really love us to reprise. The difference, of course, right now is that we are in the midst of COVID, and we had suggested at the last election that it should be in the order of £10,000. I think it's going to have to be more than that now, because if we are going to encourage people to actively engage in retraining, which is what they are probably going to have to do, either to fit the new structures that a lot of companies are now looking to restructure. I'm really concerned about this. I think there are a lot of people who are perhaps going to be left out of that process, and we have to make sure that they are included. And it means that they're either going to have to fit into roles that they haven't been recently, or they lose their jobs and they're going to have to then be retrained into a whole other area. Our policy, which I'm really proud of, that we have been pushing, of lifelong learning accounts, I think is the answer. And what that does is it will create a real buzz in terms of both the supply and the demand side in adult retraining. And that's been the issue. There isn't enough adult retraining opportunities for people. They don't have the money to do it. And if we can supercharge that right now, that is some of the answer to how we're going to deal with the uncertainty around COVID-19.
Layla, thank you very much. Ed.
Tom, this is a very timely question. It's been a problem for some time, but I think in the appalling labour market we've got at the moment, where job losses are going to mount, possibly to over 3 million, where young people are in real problems, we've got to tackle this. It's a social issue as well as an economic issue. And I think we've got to be quite radical. I like the lifelong learning accounts, but I don't think we allow employers to get away with this. And I think given that the taxpayer has bailed out many, many businesses, I think it's reasonable to ask them to step up to the plate. And, we may need to do that by reforms to the apprenticeship levy, for example, which hasn't been working very well, and too many employers have managed to find ways around it. And I think we should look at tying future support to a number of things that they ought to be doing. One way would be through procurement, for example, to make sure that they are taking on young people, they are providing training opportunities. There could be other ways that we could do this, but I think we've got to really make it clear to employers that they need to play their part. this is going to be a tough time for people. Lots of people are going to have a real tough time. And I think working with the unions, working with employers across the piece, we should do more. The other group I'd work with actually are the professional bodies that regulate a whole range of professions, not just talking about accountants, lawyers, I'm talking about nurses, a whole range. And we could ask them to be part of this exercise, which ensures that all employers are playing their bit in this very challenging economic times.
Ed, thank you very much indeed. Thank you both. I've now got a question which I've been asked to read out from Fiona. Which lessons can we learn from the winding down of the British coal industry as we encourage a shift away from polluting industries towards a greener economy? How do we protect communities and livelihoods? And how do we make sure those worried about these changes are involved in the process and trust that they have a viable future in the emerging industries? So that's from Fiona, and Ed, it's you to go first, please.
Fiona, thank you for asking the question. My family on my father's side were miners, and I was brought up in Nottinghamshire, and I remember the miners' strike. I saw what it did to the coal communities. I saw whole villages that had been basically based on coal, totally devastated. And the unemployment, the mental health, the scarring of generations that came from that, because Thatcher was so vindictive. We've got to make sure we learn every lesson possible, because it was a horrible time, and so many people in so many areas were blighted by the way they reacted, the Tories reacted. The good news is, I think if you look ahead to those sectors of the economy that will have to change because they're in fossil fuels, oil refineries, for example, big localized employer in many areas, but the fossil fuel industry is sort of everywhere in the economy, and many people employed, not least in places like Aberdeen. We've really got to think of ways to help them transition. And I'm very passionate about something called climate justice, to make sure that we're treating people in this country and indeed around the world in a fair way. So we don't just tackle the climate change problem, but we also tackle some of the social inequality in our societies at the same time, to use it as a sort of double chance. So I'm quite excited about how you can do that. I've put forward and written about this extensively, actually. I think part of it is creating the green jobs that I've talked about in my green recovery plan. That would be a massive help to many of these areas. So, when I was Cabinet Minister for Climate Change and brought 1,000 jobs to Hull, manufacturing jobs, that was beginning to replace some of the jobs that they will lose there, because there's a big oil refinery on the Humber. So there are ways of swapping the jobs. In the oil and gas industry, I argued for something called carbon capture and storage, which is a climate change policy, if you like, to capture the emissions so that you could keep some of the oil and gas, or particularly the gas power stations, actually running. The Tories got rid of it, but it was really important because it would have helped people keep in work. So, there are solutions to this. They need, not just a vision, they need some real experience to be able to deliver those. And we need to work with local communities. And if we work with local communities, with local government, with local employers, I think we can get around it, and we can make sure the transition from the fossil fuel economy that we now need to do, and fast, doesn't do what happened in those coal communities, which was so horrible and so disgusting and should never happen again.
Thank you, Ed, very much. Layla.
Thank you. I think, as I mentioned in my opening statement, we just have to recognize that this is going to happen, but also it was also going to happen with automation and artificial intelligence. We knew that our economy was going to be making these changes, and yet the government seems to still be very behind the curve and accepting that we can't wait to be putting the structures in place to catch people when they are about to fall, but then also make sure that there is a really bright future for them afterwards. And so I propose three main areas, actually. The first is, in terms of the safety net, we need to recognize that in the context of COVID-19, universal credit is not working. It's nowhere near good enough. The way that it's just not responsive enough, and this is why I've been pushing for a universal basic income, because it's a way of making sure that in that very short term, when people are potentially out of work, maybe back in work for a while, out of work again, that we have a real safety net for them. So I think we should be, and whilst it's not party policy yet, I would encourage the party to look at something like this really very seriously. But the other two things I think are much more practical. The first is about retraining. We need to do this now. Party policy, in fact, I completely agree with, is to have just transition commissions to design a framework through which we can work with the unions, with industry, and there's a joined up approach across the country. But there are going to be different ways of tackling this in different parts of the country. And so we also need to bring back regional industrial strategies. Now, this was something that Vince argued for in coalition, the Tories, who are a centralising party, and frankly, so are Labour. So this is a really interesting USP for our party, that bottom-up approach that we talk about so much. If we can have regional industrial strategies where you've got local authorities involved, you've got local communities involved, local employers involved as well, and that can help to make that shift faster and more nimble. And it's that bottom-up approach that I think is going to be that different sell to the electorate. They can see that actually we want to put the power in the hands of people and their communities. We trust them to be part of that solution. And it's a way that we can get cut through and shape a new space for our party in these difficult times.
Layla, thank you very much. So now we're coming to a question from Hugh. Hugh Mayer, please. Are you there, Hugh? I'm led to believe that you are around.
1 minute. Can you hear me?
Just a little, Hugh. Speak up, you can.
Sorry, you can hear me. Is that better? Right. Okay. Yeah. Can you hear me? Sorry, technology's never been my forte.
Okay, let's go for the question, Hugh.
Okay.
Oh, he's put.
Hugh, you've gone on to mute now. You need to unmute yourself.
Right. Is that better?
Yes, off you go with your question.
Yeah, I've worked in education about 30 years, and I've worked in further adult and higher education. When I worked in further education, I worked with a private training company. That work used to be done in FE colleges, but has effectively been de facto outsourced. I applied the salary changes over the 13-year gap between working in FE and the private training company, and there was about a 55% salary drop in real terms, and this seems to be the story of outsourcing. So I wonder what the candidates' views are on outsourcing, because at the end of the day it's real people with experiencing real worse conditions. And the only other point I would make was that when I've worked in mainstream education, if you have restructuring, you do occasionally see drops of around 20% in certain sectors, but when I did an estimate of the company's turnover in a year, it was running at about 25%. And this was across the company, almost as a matter of policy, not as a response to a situation.
Hugh, thank you very much. I think it's a really good question. I live in the borough of Southwark, and the local authority outsourced lots of stuff and brought lots of stuff now in-house again. So, big question. Layla first, please. Layla.
Thank you. So, in terms of my approach, and I think this is a liberal approach, I care about the end product. What is the service that is being delivered? Is it good value for money? And is it fair to everyone involved? And my experience locally of outsourcing is that actually the Tories would do it for outsourcing's sake. Their view was, if you have a sort of market fundamentalist approach, that approach where the market will always give you the best possible value for money, and that's the approach you take to things, it's almost its own ideology, then that will be the best way of delivering services. And I see it more from the end user's point of view. And a really good example of this is actually in healthcare locally. We had the outsourcing of physiotherapy from my local community hospital. This is part of the changes that were brought in the Health and Social Care Act, where the NHS has to compete with private firms all the time for these services. And of course, the private firms have all the money in the world to throw at the bid itself. Meanwhile, the NHS is delivering amazing stuff, but just doesn't have the same often people who are doing the bid writing. And it ended up going to Virgin Healthcare. That then was an absolute disaster. The services were nowhere near as good. they were not as available to people, and actually the medium and long-term consequences of that meant that we ended up having to take it back, change the contract, and it was very expensive. The same thing happened in my local authority with Capita, one of these massive companies that a lot of outsourcing goes out to. And I looked at this in the Public Accounts Committee, and my view now is that actually there are times when we need to remove the premise that the market is going to deliver, and that there are times when actually having the decisions and the money being spent close to the people who are receiving the services, especially when the services are very sensitive, when they're very personalized, this is a better way of achieving it. So in terms of, should we stop all outsourcing? I'm not sure I'm at that point, but I think we need to recognize that some of the changes that have been made to encourage that sort of marketization of these services has not actually delivered what people wanted, which is high quality services. And in terms of schools, I completely, by the way, just on your point about FE colleges, I mean, there's a general issue here about FE not being valued anywhere near as much as mainstream education. There is not enough money going into that sector in the first place. But when you then start creaming off some of those outsourcing jobs to private firms, that's even more profit going elsewhere. And that money should be directed at the end user. So I hope that answers your question.
Layla, thank you. I'm going to give Ed another 32 seconds because you overran slightly. Thank you, Ed.
Ed, you're on.
Thank you for the question. I've often talked about insourcing because I think there's been too many examples of outsourcing being forced, particularly on local government, and it's not worked. I can give an example from my own constituency here in Kingston, where my wife is a councillor and she's the portfolio holder for housing. So she's the lead politician on housing in the borough. And we talk about housing a lot. We met on a housing policy working group for the party. So housing is our big thing. But she is dealing with what the previous Tory administration was trying to do, which was to outsource our housing management, part to a private contractor and part to a housing association. And they've been changing everything in the council. It's made it disaster. And what Emily's been doing painstakingly is unpicking the mess the Tories made in preparation for outsourcing and changing the council so it's actually getting the benefits much more efficient and more efficient than it was before, but keeping it in-house. And I think that's a real example that's taught me, in the last few months, frankly, the benefits of keeping things in-house often. I'd give you an example where outsourcing wasn't so bad, but we did it in a special way. So our PCT, we used to call, remember in the health service, you used to have primary care trusts, so we don't have them anymore. But when we had a primary care trust, they wanted to outsource some services. And I said, look, we're not doing it to the private sector. No way. But if you want to think about a mutual where the employees own the organization, it's a not-for-profit, all the things go back into servicing, into the community, and it's local, then I'll consider it. And I work with the unions locally, Unionists and others, and they created something called Your Healthcare. And Your Healthcare is about 450 employees. It provides a lot of the health services locally, the sort of the physios, the speech and language, the OTs, the district nurses, that sort of thing. And it's very local, it's very accountable, and it's a way that I think is a different way. Because the employees actually own it and are more power than they did before, and they're doing better services. So there are ways where you can see contracting out being exciting. I think in FE you have a real point here, and what I think it goes further in FE than just outsourcing. It's the way the FE sector is constructed. FE colleges with their governing bodies are like little oligarchies, not very accountable at all. And I think we need to step back and look at the FE sector as a whole, because it's become a bit of a law unto itself. And while I'm a huge supporter of many of the things they do, Kingston College has transformed itself in recent years, is far better under a new principle than it was, and that may go in other parts of the country. Nevertheless, there's not enough link to the local community, not enough accountability, and I think we need to do far better on that. And given, in my view, FE is one of the key sectors in education going forward, to particularly on social justice, to give more vocational opportunities and so on. I think we need to get a grip of the governance of that, and we haven't at the moment as a party. We need to improve on that.
Ed, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to do a big up from my university where I'm Chancellor of South Bank, where we have a federation with Lambeth College a UTC and a secondary school. And I think that's a model that is almost without parallel in England, certainly, and is a really, really brilliant model. Anyway, there you are. They didn't pay me to do that, but I thought I would throw that in. Right, we're going to have one more question for each of you, if that's okay. And then we're going to come to the wind-up speeches, because we don't want to exhaust any. But there's some very eminent people I've noticed attending who've been silent so far, but noting down your words, very senior people in the party with lots of experience. So
I thought that was you, Simon.
That's very kind of you. So this is a question which came in by text, and it'll be coming to you first. And it's from Sam Al-Hamdini. And it said, the question is, and I'm going to add a PS to it because it's also relevant. So Sam's question is, how can we make it the obvious choice for employers to recruit and retain a truly diverse workforce? So that's the key question, and we'll do it particularly in the context of Black Lives Matter issues. And then I want you, Ed, so I think out of fairness, 2 minutes, and then 1 minute, if that's okay, Isabel, to then address the separate question, how do we make sure, in the desperate need to make sure we give young people the opportunities which COVID may be threatening, that we don't ignore the need of the older employee to be able to get back into work for the rest of their employment life. So 2 minutes, Ed, on the diverse workforce, and then 1 minute on making sure we don't forget older people's wish to continue to work. Thank you.
Will the candidates answer each, like to have a pause in between?
Yeah, no, I think if Ed does 2 minutes on the first one and then a minute on the second, it just is less disrupted, and then Layla does the same, if that's okay as well. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, Simon, thank you for your questions. There are a number of ways: legislation, procurement, and education that you can tackle this. The thing that I would say for both questions is the need to show that it's employers and business interests to be more diverse. It's employers and business interests to use people who are more mature towards the end of their working lives. And the way we do that is to show the economics of it. When I was a minister looking at women's equality, I set up something called a commission to get more women on boards. And I talked to a number of women who were on boards in the FTSE 250, and they said, you need to appoint a man, Ed, to do this. And I appointed a guy called Lord Mervyn Davis, and he did this review. And a lot of the findings of the review was that more diverse boards were more effective and produced a better company outcome. And we were able to use that with other bits, more stick as well as carrot, to push boards. And the targets we set and the aims we set from that board have been more than fulfilled. In fact, it's been a huge success story. Before, there were a huge number of boards in the FTSE 250. Didn't have a single woman on their board. Now none have no women on their boards. And we've got, I think, about 25% plus now of board members in the FTSE 250 are women. So total transformation because of that, the commission we set up and we pushed. And we used examples. I mean, there's a study from McKinsey that showed that the least diverse companies were 26% more likely, 29% more likely to be less profitable. And so there's a moral and an economic argument for diversity. And I would use the experience of my work in gender diversity on Black and ethnic minority diversity, because I think the same things apply directly. Equality and diversity is a good thing, morally and economically. And maybe we set up a similar commission to the one that I did back in 2010, 2011. We've certainly got to do far more on this agenda. And by the way, we've got to do far more as a party. I am fed up of our party failing on this agenda. I'm pretty cross about this. We've tried and failed. The Older Dice Review in 2018 spelt it out. So, you know, there's no point us going to employers and saying, get your act together, when we haven't got our act together. There's a long way to go in society. There's a long way to go in the Liberal Democrats. So let us get our own house in order. Let us make sure that we look like modern Britain, because we've failed for so long. I know Simon's been a huge champion of this, but let's really be able to speak from a position of strength. And then I think we can lead on a whole range of issues that come from the Black Lives Matter movement. And the same goes for old employers, employees. As I said earlier, I got rid of the law which allowed employers to sack people just because they got to the age of retirement, no questions asked. And that, when I was doing that, I looked at the evidence, and it showed that actually keeping on staff when they were towards the end of their working life and managing it properly was hugely productive, not least because they could show the young people coming in to the business how to work. So there's real benefits for the businesses, and we need to get that argument over.
Ed, thank you very much. Layla, if you can take those 2 points in sequence as well. Great, thank you.
Thank you. So Sam, in terms of making it the obvious choice, I mean, we just need to make the case for having a diversity of voices in the room actually helps the bottom line of companies. It's a good thing to do. But when you've got, you know, what people look at as the top of society not actually living these values, it becomes really, really difficult. And so as our own party, we need to tackle this. I'm delighted by the appointment, by the way, in the senior management team at HQ, Mimi Turner, who is from an ethnic minority, who's female, you know, really welcome addition in that top team in HQ. And by electing me as leader, I think it also sends a signal that we are serious about diversity. That we've got Boris Johnson, we've got Keir Starmer. If people are looking across the political landscape and they're saying to themselves, how serious are they about changing themselves as political parties, we kind of do need to make sure that we are living those values ourselves, and that creates a cascade. And that's why over the last few years, I've been working with my local community to help encourage people to get into local employers. I've had awards in Parliament for some of that work. I feel that we need to, as a party, really address this in a bottom-up way with local parties and really challenge them to look at their own makeup and say, you know, if you are a local party wanting to represent a diverse community, where is that diversity among your campaign team, among your executive? It's why I've been calling for FTSE 350 companies to have at least 1 in 8 on their boards coming from a Black and minority ethnic background. But by the way, this also applies to socioeconomic background. I don't think we should just limit ourselves to just BME. It needs to also include other types of diversity. And the reason why we do it is because it's the liberal way. You know, no one should be held back by things they didn't choose. No one should be, this is not a tokenistic thing. This is about the core of who we are as a society. And if we empower people to see that actually the gender, color of their skin, none of that matters. It's why we push, for example, name blind CVs. I think this is a really great innovation that we should be legislating for in Parliament, but we need to make that case. And I think it's hard to do if we're not living it ourselves. And just on the point about older people in the workplace, which I think is really important to address, well, actually, my own family has some experience of this. I have a family member who, in the 2008-9 crash, lost their job in their 50s, really struggled to then find equivalence in another sector because the entire sector fell from beneath his feet. That then led to quite serious mental health issues, to alcoholism. It was the human consequences. And we felt this as a family. It was really difficult of this. It's palpable. So we do need adult retraining and lifelong learning to be embedded in our society. But we also need support services around people, particularly for mental health, because the challenges are immense.
Excellent. That's the end of the questions. So we're about to come to our 2-minute wrap-up sessions. Layla, you'll be going first, and then Ed, and then I want to just do thank yous to both of you. So Layla, you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I really enjoyed it. And the fizzing with ideas, that's what Paddy used to say, but that's what I want to bring back as leader in our party. We have to have a forum where we can discuss this forward-looking, bold, liberal agenda that our country so deserves. And I can feel this ambition, I can feel this fizz, and it needs to be bottom-up. But the challenge for our party is that we need to rebuild trust, and we need to make sure that we rebuild credibility with the electorate. The Liberal Democrats need to start delivering on our ideas and have a vision for the country that we can start to affect from now, not in some fictitious time in Lord knows when we might be in government. We have to do it now. And that's why we need a politics that looks and sounds different, that is collaborative, that uses every sinew that we've got, whether it's media, whether it's cross-party working in the House to affect real change. These are the things that I have a proven track record of being able to do. And we can use those tools to get things done for people now, like how I delivered the coronavirus compensation scheme, which means that NHS and social care workers get, well, the families of bereaved families get £60,000 extra that they didn't have before. We need to be able to show people that we understand their concerns, and that's why education, the environment and the economy is my suggestion for what we should be campaigning on as a party, but it shouldn't stop there. We need to keep listening. We need to keep pushing for devolution of power, on digital rights, on electoral reform. All of these things really, really matter. And we need to start winning again. It's what I'm good at doing. It's what I've done here in Oxford, West and Abingdon, first overturning a massive Tory majority and then increasing it massively again in the last election. We need to take that fight to Boris Johnson, because our country deserves so much better than him. And what they do deserve is a revived Liberal Democrat Party and a revived United Kingdom. So please, I ask for your support as leader of our party so that we can move forwards together.
Layla, thank you very much indeed. Ed.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm standing because I want our party to win again. I'm offering you a vision, experience, and judgment to make that happen. And when I talk about my vision of a greener, fairer, more caring society, I think that links with a lot of the aspirations of trade unionists and employees across the country. You know, we want those green jobs to tackle this appalling recession, making sure we're providing the training for the young people and the older people. We want the social justice that I'm talking about, whether it's in housing or education. I think we want to be on the side of the low-paid care staff in our care homes and all those unpaid carers. And that's the vision that I want us to put forward. And I bring my experience of 30 years in the party, 20 years in Parliament, 5 years in government, and that experience also of my own life as a carer, as a young carer for my terminally ill mum, actually for my elderly nana when she was getting frail. I looked after her for 10 years, and now my son. So I bring that life experience, and I hope ability to reach out to people and for them to connect with me. And I also think I've got the experience as a winner. I fought 7 elections, I've won 6, which isn't a bad record. When I won Kingston and Surbiton in 1997, I won by a majority of 56 votes. I was 106 on the target list. We won 47 seats. I'm the only MP in our party's history to have won a non-target seat. So I really know how to win. And I think I have the credibility, particularly on business and the economy, to bring those soft Tories to our fold, but also because I've been a centre-left politician, to squeeze that Labour vote, to get that winning combination for our awful electoral system. And I've shown year in, year out that I can get that media cut through. Just last week, when I got an independent inquiry commitment from the Prime Minister, massive coverage. So with that media cut through, with that experience campaigning, we can win again. I want you to back me to be your leader so we do win again.
Ed, thank you very much indeed. So thank you to you, Layla. Thank you to you very much for fully and energetically participating. Really, really appreciate your time. Very impressive, I have to say. And if anybody who is watching is not a Liberal Democrat, I hope they will now join. And if those who are watching know people who haven't joined, I hope you will persuade them. I want to say thanks to you both, obviously. Isabel, my co-chair, thank you, Isabel. We, I think, did a moderately seamless job. And then to the home team, Jack and Georgia and Greg, thank you very much for all your help. Really, really appreciate it. To Digital Lib Dems and to the Lib Dem Debate Twitter account. And Kevin, to you for having the idea and pushing this through. And if those of you who are not yet members of ALDTU would like to join today, you can do that. You'll be very welcome. The trade union movement is going to be as important as ever during a time of a Tory government like the one we have. I'm clear about that. And we absolutely have to strengthen it And as both candidates said, we have to get out, engage with the trade unions. They need us, we need them, but more importantly, the country needs us both to do really successfully. So thank you very much. Enjoy your afternoon, and whether you're tricycle pushing or co-op shopping or 5K running or whatever else, for as long as the weather remains good, all the very best, and all the very best to you both for the campaign.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks,
Take
everybody.
care. Bye-bye.